for attending. Today, as you can see on the screen, I am going to be talking about eliciting creative responses in writing class. So basically, what this means is that we're going to be talking about how to make your students answer their questions and write in a more creative way, and to inspire creativity in our students. So before we get into that, I should introduce myself to all of you. My name is Joseph, and I have been living in Korea for just about 11 years. And in my time in Korea, I've been a content developer, a teacher trainer, and just a full-scale teacher. And I've taught all levels, all different grades, different abilities. But I specialized in teaching writing and grammar, especially when I was a teacher trainer. And I've been published in the United States and in South Korea in different mediums. So suffice it to say, I love to write. And that's why I'm going to be talking about writing today with all of you. Before we can really talk about writing, just go over quickly our plan. We're going to talk about the challenges and misconceptions of writing and teaching a writing class. I'm going to explain what elicitation is and how we can encourage creativity. And then we'll look at a couple of simple elicitation activities that you can hopefully apply and incorporate into your very next lesson. And then we'll wrap things up with a Q&A. But before I start talking about writing, I want to get to know a little bit about the people in this room. So basically, how many of you enjoy writing? That's the simplest question. How many, go ahead and put in the comments if you enjoy writing, if you hate writing, if you're terrified of writing, and if you are a writing teacher, if you teach a writing class. Because these are important things. Not everybody enjoys writing. Not everybody takes the time to write on a daily basis, and that's okay. It's a common thing. I see a few people like writing diary entries, so travel blogs. Okay. Yeah, it's definitely hard. Writing is hard. Yeah, I agree. Writing is a wonderful stress reliever as well. And even if you do like writing, it's okay to not feel confident as a writing teacher, because they do have different things that you have to, different muscles that you have to flex. But yeah, it's okay to be afraid of writing, because it can be a bit of a beast. Okay, so as I see, there's people here saying that they enjoy writing, but it's tough. That's kind of the general consensus of what writing is and writing class is. So let's talk about some of the challenges. So basically, writing is, it's not necessarily any more difficult than any other part of English. It's just that the challenges to writing are different. And we can't apply the same skills that we use for speaking or for reading to writing. So writing is a productive skill, just like speaking is, but the way we produce writing is very different, because we are using not just our mind, we're using our body as well to produce that writing. So it does become a little bit of a workout. So let's talk about the writing challenges. So writing is intimidating, and a few of you have mentioned that in the comments already. Writing it's scary because it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of time and thought and revision. So nobody produces a perfect paragraph or a perfect essay on the first go around, and you shouldn't expect to. So it does take a lot of work, and it takes a lot of intention when you have to force yourself to sit down and write and to practice. And even if you write a diary every day, sometimes there are those days where you're just like, oh, I don't really want to do it. And that's the difference with like speaking, because almost everybody speaks on a daily basis. So even if you're not studying your speaking practice or anything like that, you are still speaking regularly. And that's not necessarily true of writing, especially if English is your second language, or you're going to be writing less in L2 than you would be in L1. And even maybe in the regular day, you're not going to be using your L1 in written form all that often. Like texting aside, I don't really count as writing because you're not going to use your texting. You're not using grammar necessarily. Spelling isn't that important. So I'm discounting text messaging here. But the challenges to teaching writing are also a little bit different, because we have to not just think about ourselves and our own fears, but we have to think about our students. And so one of the things that we come across in writing is that writing is often the last part of an English lesson, an English unit. And so the writing activities or the classes themselves are rushed or forgotten. And sometimes if we run out of time, say the grammar lesson took a little bit too long and we need to wrap that up first, that will then eat into usually the writing class, because writing incorporates grammar. And so the thinking is that we can always get to writing later in a different way. So writing does get ignored sometimes. Writing is also often taught like a speaking class, because it's the easiest way to communicate how to teach writing. Is we think we're speaking to the students are speaking back to us, and then we write what we speak. But there are different skills that we use, and there are different styles that we have to incorporate when we write versus when we speak. Writing does tend to be a bit more formal, and so we do have to kind of think about that when we teach, and that's often forgotten. And writing is also thought of as an individual activity, but in class it shouldn't be. It's writing, putting a pen or a pencil to paper or fingers to keyboards. That is an individual action, but the planning and the revision and just the discussion of ideas, all of these things can be done in a group, and it should be encouraged. Even, some of the most famous writers, when they are writing, they workshop their ideas to other writers, to their friends, to editors, to get feedback and input. And that's a very, very important part of any writing class. And of course, our students are a major challenge to writing, because students are like rivers. They go for the path of least resistance, and they want to complete activities as fast as possible, and as easily as possible. So this can contribute to a lot of repetition of the same answers, very simple or limited responses, even though we know our students are capable of doing so much more. So that is a big challenge to a writing class, is getting them to replicate their English knowledge to their full ability. And when we think about writing class, there are certain things that writing class is and writing class is not. So let's take a look at what writing class is not first. Let's dispel this right away. It's not a grammar class. It's not a vocabulary class. It's both of those things, and it's more than just those things. Grammar and vocabulary are important, obviously, because you're writing those words down, and you want to make sure that your syntax and your punctuation, all of that is important. But we're not teaching those individual skills. We're kind of teaching a holistic brand of English. Writing is not a sprint. You should be taking your time. You want to go in baby steps. You want to plan things out so that you're not skipping over important things for your students, and that your students aren't rushing through the actual writing themselves. And this third one is the most important one. Writing class is not for punishment. Writing is not about punishing your students. And as you can see here, Bart, we're very familiar with Bart writing lines on the board as a punishment for something that he did wrong. This is not a good thing to do, because you're reinforcing writing as a negative output. And if you're punishing your students by having them write lines or write an apology letter or write an explanation as to why they did something wrong, this reinforces writing as a negative thing, and we don't want to do that. So if you're going to discipline your students, try to avoid writing as the way to discipline them. And it's something that like we're all guilty of. Like I had to write lines as a kid when I was a student, and I had to write apology letters and stuff like that. But it can become a reinforcement of negative impressions in writing. And as I mentioned before, writing class is not silent. We should be talking with our students. Our students should be talking to each other and building up a database or data bank of ideas that they can use. And writing class is not about teaching perfection. Nobody is a perfect writer, and we shouldn't expect that from our students. We want them to be able to apply the things that they know. And we want to also encourage them to take chances. And that's what writing class is all about. It's a class for experimentation. We're trying to get the students to create new ideas that will help them develop all of their English language skills. So when we encourage experimentation, we encourage them to make mistakes. They're going to push themselves a little bit further. They may not want to in the early stages of it, but eventually they will get there. But when we give them the opportunity to experiment, it makes class so much better. Writing class is evaluative, but it is not graded, especially for young English learners. We're going to be talking about YLE students today for the most part, but most of these things can be applied to higher level students as well. But we shouldn't be grading writing at such a young age. We should be using it as a way to assess our students' ability. And get a sense of where they are in their development. Writing class is a marathon. You need to take your time. You build up those writing muscles over time, and you can't rush through things. Writing class is fun. Make it fun. You can incorporate writing games. You can incorporate fun activities, drawing pictures, things like that, acting things out. There are ways to make writing class fun, and I encourage you all to come up with fun ideas for your classes. And finally, writing is about teaching clarity. So like I said, we're not teaching perfection, but we should be trying to strive for clear writing. And you want your students to understand that when they write, they don't necessarily have the ability to use body language to explain what they want to do. They don't have other stimuli that they can use to communicate meaning. So we want to make sure that our writing is clear. And sometimes that means very, very simple sentences, which is okay. And very, very quickly, when I teach writing and when I write myself, I try to remember these 5 Ps. This is something that I created for myself to help me and to keep me motivated to want to write and to help motivate my students as well. So the 5 Ps to teaching writing, or the 5 Ps to writing, are passion, positivity, perseverance, purpose, and prose. The first 3, passion, positivity, and perseverance, are the most important. You want to come into class and be excited about what you're going to teach, because that excitement translates to your students. You want to be positive. Either as a writer, you want to believe in your strengths, trust your strengths, but you also want to accept your mistakes and accept that those mistakes can be learned from. Same thing, you want your students to accept that the mistakes that they made are easily fixed. And that comes with perseverance. You want to keep working at it, keep writing every day, push yourself to do that. Purpose and prose for younger students are not so important, but as a teacher, you want to make sure that you have clear goals and objectives for your students, and you want to keep that visible for them. And then for prose, we're not trying to be extravagant writers. We're not expecting them to use the most impressive words that they know. We're just trying to promote clarity. And that's the big part of that. So these 5 Ps, I always think about them when I approach a class, how I plan my classes to incorporate these things in there. And our main objectives as teachers is that the goal of every writing class is for students to produce something with clarity that demonstrates that they understand, but not necessarily mastered, the class language point or points. And so when we do that, just encourage your students to experiment with the language that they know. Encourage them to make mistakes. And when I say that, people are usually pretty skeptical because it's not expected that teachers are wanting mistakes in their class, but it's okay because they're experimenting and they'll grow from those mistakes. So one way that we can teach writing is through elicitation. Does anybody know what elicitation is? Anybody have any idea of what it is? You can write it in the comments if you do know. Not really. That's a perfectly acceptable answer. Eliciting is, yes, it's to encourage students to answer or contribute. Yeah, it's basically, to put it very simply, the technique of encouraging learners to actively produce speech or writing. And elicitation is very commonly used in vocabulary classes where to get the students to explain the meaning of a word or to explain the word based on a definition or a synonym, we will elicit in different ways. But eliciting is also very, very useful in a writing class for those creative ideas as well. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today, not so much vocabulary elicitation. Elicitation is a very powerful diagnostic tool for teachers because it helps you gauge continually throughout the class where your students are in what they're understanding. So you can gauge and figure out if they actually understand the core concepts of your lesson, and you can see what they are applying from previous lessons as well. It's used to ascertain what students know, not to guide them to logical conclusions. So when you're asking these questions, you don't necessarily want to have a specific answer in mind. You want to have an idea of where this could go, but you're not leading the students to one or two answers. You're trying to see what they know and how they perceive the information that they're getting. And eliciting is for expansion. And when we elicit for expansion, we're getting more creativity into our class. We're incorporating that creativity. And when I say eliciting for expansion, we're using elicitation as a bridge between the class objective and the student's prior knowledge. So the stuff that they learned yesterday, a week ago, a month ago, a year ago, all of that still applies to your current class. Even if it's not directly connected to the main point, you still want to make sure that you can incorporate it and connect it to the things that they already know, whether it's a grammar point, vocabulary, or whatever. And it's also important to remember that the book is your foundation, but the students are going to build on that foundation in different ways. And elicitation allows you to do that because it allows you to get a number of different answers from different students that they can use together to build whatever it is that they will build out of their English education. Now, why do you think eliciting is useful? Based on what I told you, what possible reasons should you elicit? Gathering ideas is a very good answer. I think that was from earlier, but yeah, gathering ideas is a great reason to elicit. Like I mentioned, it connects prior knowledge to newly acquired language. We are going to create a student database of shared ideas in the class. So each student, if you show one picture to a student, all of the students, or to a group of students, I should say, each student will key in on different things. Even if you show the same picture over and over, they will key in on different things each time. But when you encourage all of the students in the class to share their ideas, they'll get a more complete picture where they won't necessarily, if you show them a picture of the house, some students will key in on the color, some will key in on the size or what could be inside, things like that. So we gather all of that knowledge so that all of the students are sharing it together and building it together. Yes, it does, definitely. It widens creative ideas for writing. That's the core component of what we're going to be talking about today. Eliciting is useful to increase student participation, and oops, it personalizes English education. So every student is going to get the same book. Every student will get the same information, but then they will then take that information and morph it into something that fits them. And this is how we encourage creativity, because we want them to connect the English language to their own experiences. And elicitation actually teaches writing organization, which is something that is very difficult to teach. It's one of the hardest things to teach to any level, because everybody has a lot of ideas. They want to put all of those ideas on paper, and sometimes it just doesn't work out. But when we show the logical flow through elicited questions, we can actually reinforce writing organization without actually teaching writing organization. Now, how do we elicit? How do we ask eliciting questions? Now, for this part of the webinar, I'm actually going to have you, all of you, participate with this. So I'm going to talk about things, but as we talk about them, I'm going to have you actually practice writing different types of questions. So very quickly, we're going to be talking about two basic types of questions: open-ended questions and closed questions. Now, an open-ended question is obviously going to require more than one answer most of the time. It's more than one word to answer the question. Some open-ended questions will be one or two words, but the ideal open-ended question is something that the students have to use detail to explain. And a closed question is simple. It's just a short answer. It can often be like a yes or no question as well. There's not a lot of detail, but both of these types of questions are useful. Open and closed questions are important tools, and they help prepare the teacher as well as the students when you do things like concept checks at the end of a lesson or at the end of an activity. So what we're going to do right now, I want everybody to take a look at this warm-up page here for Unit 4 from my first reading. We're not going to talk about the story. We're not going to read the passage. We're just going to do a picture talk warm-up. So take a look at the picture that you see on the screen there. And as I go through this, I want you to think of closed questions. Think of different types of closed questions that you could ask about the picture specifically. So take a couple more minutes to look at this. Go ahead and write them in the comments in the chat box, and I will come back to those and we'll review what you guys have come up with. As you are writing these questions, I'm going to give you a couple of quick examples of appropriate and less appropriate closed questions. So I have two examples on the screen here. Who does this room belong to? And is this a bedroom? So these two questions are probably common questions that you might ask. Who does this room belong to? If you're familiar with the future characters from my first reading, this is Ella. So when students are answering this question, they're going to have maybe one or two possible answers. They're going to say, oh, it belongs to Ella, or it belongs to the girl, something like that. This is a good closed question because it confirms important information. We're checking that they know some very simple things. So closed questions are great for confirming that they understand things. Is this a bedroom is not great though, because what is the answer here? It's yes. The answer is yes. And if you generally, when you ask yes or no questions, the students are generally going to say yes. So it's not great to ask a question like this because we can't build off of this. There's no real detailed information. There's nothing specific. And like I said, you can't expand. What we can do to fix this question though is avoid yes answers. So we can change this to, is this a kitchen? And the students are going to say, what? You can go and look at the picture. No, they're going to say, no, this is not a kitchen. If they say yes, we can then take a step back and we can say, okay, well, what do you do in a kitchen? You cook dinner, you eat food, things like that. What can you find in a kitchen? A refrigerator, food. And then you go, do you see any of those? Do you see food in this picture? No. Do you see a refrigerator? No. What do you see? And then you go back to what they see in the picture specifically. So we've taken that no and turned it into greater detail. So let's see. And then from there, actually, once you get to it's a bedroom, once they give you that answer, then you can expand and move forward. So we're making sure that they have a clear foundation with these closed questions. So let's see what some of the questions that you guys came up with. Let me scroll up a little bit. Okay. Oh, sorry, my first writing. Sorry. Is your room clean? Who is reading a book? Where is the lamp? These are good questions. Who is reading a book? This is good because we're keying in on the character that they should be familiar with. Where is the lamp and is your room clean? These might be tough to start out with because we don't know if they know these words yet. We don't know if they necessarily know what a lamp is. We don't know if they know what clean is because that's actually a teaching target in this lesson. So we want to go simpler to start. We want to go with kind of the whole picture. So what is happening in the picture is a good opening closed question. What do you see in the closet? We can get there. What is in the toy box? Yeah, so you guys are keying in on specific elements of the picture. You're still leading the students to a conclusion with these. So you could maybe frame these as these are good secondary questions, I would say. Do you like the room is a good question because the next logical question is why? That is a great question. How many dresses does she have? Okay, yeah, these are good questions. And what do you see in the picture? That's a perfect question. It's a perfect question to ask because then they can start listing off things very quickly, books, lamp, bed, and they will mention the things that they like or the things that they know. And this helps you as a teacher recognize where you can focus the lesson. So which vocabulary they don't know, which vocabulary they do know. Okay, now let's try this again. This time we're going to do it with open-ended questions. So same thing, look at this picture on the screen and try and come up with open-ended questions that would require the students to give multiple answers or more detailed answers. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples and then I'll check back and see what you guys come up with as well. So to start, my first example would be, what do you see in Ella's room? Now, why is this an open-ended question and not a closed question? It's an open-ended question because there are multiple possible answers. There are answers that we can see visually, but there are also answers that are not necessarily in the picture that we didn't necessarily consider. So when we think about this, what do you see in Ella's room? Maybe the students have an active imagination and they'll say, well, there's a door. Even though you can't see it in the picture, it is probably in the room because most rooms have a door, things like that. Now, this is an okay open-ended question. And the reason I say it's an okay open-ended question is because we get a limited amount of detail from the students. They're more or less going to stick with what they see in the picture. And that means there are a limited number of correct answers. So this means that there's limited independent thinking. And eventually, if you just go around the room, you're going to start getting the same answers. So the students will recognize, oh, lamp is a correct answer. So if they're a little bit shy, they'll just start saying lamp. And they will mimic the correct answers as opposed to thinking about the other things that they see. They're not going to be experimenting with things as much. So this is it's an appropriate question. It's one that we should ask, but it's one that we should keep brief. It's a briefly used question. Let's see what else you guys have come up with before I get to my... Oh, okay. So these are some good questions. What do you think Ella is reading? Yeah, we're keying in on an element of that you can build on, like why, and you can build off of that by saying like, well, why is she reading in her room? So yeah, there's a flow there that you have. Would you want to change the items and their locations in the room? That's a good question too. And that actually connects to what I would ask. How many books are there on the shelf? This is more of a closed question because we can count. There's only going to be one answer. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 books. So there's only one answer to that question. So I would say that's more of a closed question. How do you think she feels? Sure. Do you have a dresser in your room? That is a great question too. And that's where I would go for a great open-ended question, something like this. Think about your room at home. How is it similar to Ella's? Now, of course, level this sort of question to your students, but this is getting them to do a couple of things. They have to think about multiple aspects to the question. And this is what makes it a good open-ended question. The students will subconsciously have to think about their room and compare it to Ella's room. And then they'll go, okay, well, Ella has a bed, I have a bed. Ella has books, I have books. And then they can share those things. It allows the students or the teacher to also level the question a little bit. If they're struggling with how is Ella's room similar to my room, you can say, okay, well, what's in your room? And then, do you see a bed in Ella's room? So do both of you have a bed? Yeah, things like that. So you can level it down and then level it up as you need. Plus, you get another logical question. What is the logical question that you could ask after how is your bedroom similar to Ella's? You ask the opposite. How is your bedroom different from Ella's? And then we get a different set of ideas that come out from the students. So we're building up from the book, but we're personalizing. So the students are connecting their room to the room that they see in the book. So let's see. Let me see if I missed any other ones. Yeah, okay, so yeah, do you have a dresser in your room? Where is it? What is the room that you do not have in your, what is in the room that you, in the picture, yes. Yeah. So what is in the picture of the room that you do not have in your room? That's a great question to ask. And what color do you think she likes? That's also a good question because that's something that might appear in their writing when they're talking about their room. And what would you like in your room if you can have anything you wanted? That's a good question too, but that's a very high order question. And that would be something that you would kind of work your way up to at one point. But I think it is an appropriate question to ask, especially if your students are excited about talking about their rooms. But yeah, that's a great open-ended question. Oh, I forgot. So what is I gave it away, but what is the worst question to ask, and the question that you should never ask in your classroom? It's not a way to elicit. I gave it away, but it is, do you understand? We should never, ever ask this question in our class because your students are going to just say yes and then move along. Do they actually understand? We have no idea. There's no way of knowing. We can get them to demonstrate that they understand by asking content check questions, so CCQs. But you should never say, do you understand? Or okay, got it. Those sorts of questions are inappropriate in any classroom. So don't use this word. Don't use this phrase. Okay, so let's briefly talk about how to encourage creativity. And we're going to encourage creativity through elicitation, but that takes some planning. And that's why we're going to talk about having a plan first. So you want to have a plan. You want to have an idea of what you want to elicit before class. So when you go through a lesson, look at the different activities and just write down a couple of questions that you could use. Now, you may not necessarily use those questions. You have to be flexible. You may not use those questions, but it'll give you an idea and it'll give you a starting point with your students. And then you can adjust in class based on your students' answers. So even for this webinar, I planned out questions for each of those pictures and for the pictures that we use in the book so that I can refer to things and be like, okay, well, they get this, they understand this, this, and this, but they're having a little trouble with this. So maybe we can work there. So have a plan. And I mentioned this earlier, have a clearly stated or written objective. And it often is very helpful to write your objective, your class objective on the board at the start of class and leave it there so that you can refer back to it, especially if your class kind of gets off the rails. You can get, okay, well, hold on. What are we talking about today? What do we want to learn today? And you can refer back to the class objective and kind of rein the students back in. So have a plan is the first step to creating creativity. Use pictures often. The pictures prompt the students and the teachers to talk about their ideas. So just like we did with the warm-up, as you saw, there are so many different questions that you can ask, and there are so many different things to talk about a very simple picture. But it helps the students connect the language that they already know with images. You should also create an image library. So when you have an image that you use in your class, save it and reuse it. Because when you reuse images, the students will, the next time you use it, they will have acquired more language that they can connect to that picture. So their answers might be different, but reusing images is really, really useful. And if you're struggling to find proper images, work with your coworkers, work with your fellow teachers, see what images that they use in their class, especially if it's on the same grade and your students are moving from teacher to teacher. Pooling resources is great. You can also have the students bring in pictures or take pictures themselves. Give them the directions and the guidance to do it, but allow them to take control of what they're going to be talking about. So you can use their pictures to share ideas and with the rest of the class. A child's perspective is always going to be different. So if you say, take a picture of something that is square and you have textbooks, they will take pictures of textbooks, but they might take a picture of like a floor tile. Or something else. So you never know what a student will produce when given freedom. So encourage that and embrace that in your class. TPR. We talk about TPR all the time. Total physical response is super important, and people don't necessarily connect it to writing because writing is, white knuckling on a piece of paper with a pen. But in the planning stages, TPR is really, really useful because you're connecting vocabulary and concepts with actions, which is more fun for especially young learners. But it allows the students to interpret what they're learning in different ways. So not all students learn just by listening. And when they're allowed to move and use body language to explain things, it really does help. But it also helps improve clarity in writing. One of the things that I do in my class with young students when they're writing sentences, especially if it's something with action in it, I ask them to act out what they're writing. So if they're talking about like they're going to a trip to the zoo or something like that, or they're cleaning their room, I go, okay, tell me what you do, how you clean your room. And they act it out. And if they struggle to act it out, then we can be like, okay, well, how would you say this in a way that you can do it? And if they're having trouble with that, then I go, okay, tell me and I'll act out what you're telling me to do. So that those actions will really help with clarity, because if they can't mime it, they will probably struggle with writing it. As a bonus, add costumes, add puppets. They're really, really useful. It makes the class more fun, and it allows them to perform their writing as well. So if they're writing sentences, have them act them out. Use costumes, use puppets, use Chip. It's very useful. And for creativity, we need to use worksheets. It's a writing class, so they should be writing as much as possible. We have in our textbooks, we have different activities that incorporate coming up with ideas and brainstorming, just like this one here. Step 5 in our lesson is making an idea web. We can do that with just the textbook, and that's fine. But we should also, since this is a dedicated activity, we should also be doing this at different times. So use a lot of board work. But when we do board work, it's just the teacher writing, the students aren't actually writing. So give them brainstorming worksheets. Brainstorming worksheets give the students their own space to write. It helps them remember their ideas. So if they think of something at the beginning of the class, or you ask them to remember something from the beginning of the class, they can write it down and have it saved so they don't forget it, because children have short attention spans. So something really important, they might forget easily if it's new to them. Worksheets, brainstorming worksheets also help them think before they write, which is very useful, and it helps keep the board clear so you can write more. Use the resources that eFuture provides. So the stuff that you can find on eSmart Classes is tremendously useful for getting your students extra practice and to think about ideas in different ways. But one thing that I also do is I have my own, like I make brainstorming worksheets or even just blank pieces of paper, and I laminate them so that each student has their own mini whiteboard. Because I've taught in class in schools where I've had negative money in budget. So I had to make do with what I had. And so using this, you give them dry erase pens, they can write down the important things, and they have it in front of them at all times. This is really, really useful. They can refer back to things. Of course, if the students can't do that, you can always take them away. But then at the end of the class, you wipe them down, and then you can reuse those same worksheets for another class. But yeah, you do need a little bit of classroom management to give them laminated worksheets with dry erase markers. And of course, encouraging creativity is the trickiest part of teaching writing, because you really have to do a lot of the same things over and over. You want to repeat the same skills, the same activities, revisit concepts, revisit your objective, but you don't want to be repetitive. So you don't want the students to be over repeating the same answers, because then you lose that creativity. If they're only able to think of 3 things, stop with those 3 things and let them master those 3 things before you try and add extra stuff. If you just have them repeating the same ideas over and over, you're eliciting the same answers over and over, maybe it's time to stop eliciting and let them move on to the next activity. You want to gently push your students to produce new ideas. So sometimes the way you can do this is rephrase a question. So like I said, with the getting rid of yes answers and changing them to no answers, rephrasing questions helps the students come up with different answers and expand on answers that they've already given. And as always, gamify your elicitation. All right, so we're going to talk about, with the last little bit of time we have here, just some simple elicitation activities that you can use in your class. Now, I'm going to be talking about these in different phases of your class. I'm going to be using the Engage, Study, Activate language for classes, which is not necessarily the same information that you'll see in the book. When we are talking about my first writing, my next writing, we use the 6 steps to writing, which I have on the screen here. I'm not going to go into detail with these because we have 2 very wonderful webinars that Kevin and Sue have done in the past They're on our YouTube channel, so you can check those out at your leisure. And they will break down those 6 steps for you in the time that I don't have right now. So what I am going to ask, though, is taking a look at these 6 steps. When do you think it is appropriate to elicit and use elicitation? Which steps would you say are the best times to elicit? I'll let you think about that for a second. During the planning stage, yes. Organizing ideas, step 5, yeah, absolutely. When we were practicing open-ended questions, open-ended and closed questions, what stage of the writing or what step were we doing? Yeah, we were in the warm-up. So step 1 is a good one. Step 4 is a good one. When you're doing writing practice, yep, absolutely. This is kind of a gotcha question. You should be eliciting in all of these steps. You can elicit for any of these steps because when you're introducing vocabulary, you can elicit the vocabulary. When you're talking about grammar, you can elicit understanding of the grammar. You can actually elicit between these steps as well to connect them to each other. So you can elicit out of the warm-up into the word practice. So elicit at any time during your writing class. You won't find a bad place to elicit. The one place I would say you want to take a step back is step 6, where you're not going to be eliciting to the whole class, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But for step 6, we're going to be eliciting on more of an individual level or a small group level. So we'll get into that in a moment. The activity that I'm going to show you, we've already sort of done throughout this webinar, is the staircase activity. And this activity is all about baby steps. So you're going to start with a sentence stem, an objective, or an idea that comes directly from the book. Start with something that they are learning and that you want to build off of. You're going to have a student or a few students provide an answer to that initial sentence stem or question that you have. And then you're going to ask follow-up questions based on the student's answer. Now, you can have different students answer the follow-up questions, or you can have the same student answer the follow-up question. It's up to you. But you basically do this until you reach a logical stopping point, or the students are no longer able to answer additional questions, or if it's no longer helpful for the students. But you can repeat this activity and turn it into a game as well, where you can turn it into a boat race type of game or a ladder game, something like that. So let's take a look at this page here, and we're going to focus on the activity B. So we're going to take our stem from this, our sentence stem, which is my room is. So we're giving them the subject and the verb, and in their activity, they have to, in the actual textbook activity, they have to come up with multiple sentences that complete this stem, or the my room stem. So we give the students this question based off of what they have in the textbook, what they've learned. What would be our next logical question? Any ideas? If you look at the others section, the students are probably going to latch on to these because they've been exposed to them already. They're going to say, my room is, the students will answer, yeah, my room is clean. The other option, my room is messy. So you get an answer from the students based off of that initial question. So based on that and that question, if they answer my room is messy, what is a question that we can ask that directly connects to that? Any ideas? Is your room clean? Yeah, What do you have in your room? Yeah, that's a possible room. That's a possible good question. Yes, Agatha, you got the question that I'm looking for. Why is your room messy? Why is your room messy? Now, this is going to bring in some of the other parts of the lesson because they talk about using in, on, and under, like where things go in your room. So why is your room messy? They can say, oh, my toys are on the floor. Now, what is your next question? What's the next step in this staircase? If your toys are on the floor, where should they go? Because we're still referring back to messy here. So we want to keep with the messy idea. Why are your toys on the floor? Sure. Or if we want to keep it closer to the book, where can you put your toys? Yeah, where should your toys go? And then they can say, I can put my toys in the box. So yeah, this is a quick, simple staircase activity. This is connecting all of the ideas that they've learned in this unit so far, but we're also not introducing anything new. They're only using language that they have learned and should know how to use. We're not introducing any new ideas in this staircase activity. You want to stick to what they know. And if your students get stuck in this activity, you can always backtrack. So if if they say my room is messy and then they can't explain why their room is messy, you can take a step back and change your question. So instead of specifically your room, go, what does a messy room look like? Or you can change it up and go, okay, what does a clean room look like? So you can backtrack and then move forward once you know the students are able to answer the question. And again, this is an easy way to help bridge the gap between sentence building and paragraph writing. This is something that's really, really difficult. There's a huge gap for students and in the degree of difficulty between just writing sentences and eventually writing a full paragraph. These students are not going to be writing paragraphs anytime soon. This is Unit 4 of Book 1. So they're not going to be writing paragraphs just yet. They're still putting sentences together. But when they eventually get to that stage of writing a paragraph, they're already going to have an idea of how to organize things if you use a staircase activity like this repeatedly, because they're going to see how to organize from big to small or specific to detailed or general to detailed, things like that. They'll have an idea of what a topic sentence is without ever actually learning those terms yet. So this helps connect and makes paragraph writing easier eventually. Okay, so that activity that we just looked at here, this would be something that is in the study phase of learning. So let's very quickly look at another one here. This is a vocabulary activity. Now, when you're going through the study phase, you want to make sure that the students are understanding the basics. So you want to know the foundation has to be solid. During this time, you're going to be correcting mistakes when they occur. So if the student doesn't know the word for bed or pillow, you would correct them here. So you understand that they know these words, these key vocabulary words. But you're also still trying to encourage students to come up with multiple different answers and avoiding repetition. You're going to be using a lot of content checks as well. So here would be a good place to use the staircase activity to get them from going over the vocabulary review to getting to a look and circle down here about clean and messy rooms. You can connect these things because we have the vocabulary words for the objects themselves and where they go. So you have clothes. Where do the clothes go? They go in the closet. Where do the toys go? They go in the basket. Where does the pillow go? It goes on the bed. So you have those basic things, and then you can staircase those connected ideas into making a clean or a messy room. So just something very simple here. Now, this is going to be different in the activate phase, because in the activate phase, the teacher is going to be taking a step back, just to make sure everybody knows when you're during the activate phase, the teacher is the facilitator. Your students are going to be playing with the language that they know. They're going to be using it and interpreting it in their own way. So the teacher is taking a step back from leading and guiding the class and letting the students kind of take charge of their learning. So you're going to elicit on an individual scale. So this is, like I said, in the final writing, maybe even in step 5 when they're organizing, you want to take a small step back and don't elicit to the entire class, but elicit to different students, so that if you see that they're struggling, you can give them ideas that are specific to them. You're not going to correct answers during an activate phase activity. You're going to wait until they are done, because you don't want to interrupt their flow. Let them experiment, let them play. And then afterwards you can go, okay, this worked well, this didn't work so great, this is how we can fix it. But don't interrupt the student's flow as they're working through an activity unless they ask you to. And then elicit to remind the students of what they already know. So when they're building their web, let them build their web on their own. If you see a student struggling, they're only able to fill in 1 or 2 of the bubbles, then you can go and be like, okay, well, think about your room and elicit based on that, or think about remind them of Ella's room, remind them of refer back to the pictures in the lesson. So this is a way to get them to keep going. This is the gentle push that you elicit on a personal level. And then, of course, if your students are going fine, they're not struggling, write with them. Write along with them, complete the activities with them to show them that it is possible to do. Sometimes students need to see the teacher to be able to do that. Teachers will often model what they expect, and then they'll go around and start checking. But it is often very helpful for you to write along with the students. Same thing applies here. When they're writing their own sentences, their own paragraphs, they're drawing their pictures, you should be, again, taking a step back, write with them, encourage them, and above everything else, praise your students. This is what makes experimentation possible, is when you praise them, tell them that they're doing good things. And if they're struggling, go back to that staircase activity and work with them on a one-on-one level. Don't spend too much time with one student. Give them, do an abridged version of the staircase activity, but you can still do it here to get them to complete the sentences if they're struggling to get from their idea web to their actual writing. So as we come to the end of this webinar, I just want to conclude with a couple of key points for you. Remember, when you are eliciting, to use a combination of closed and open-ended questions. This will help you and the students organize your ideas before writing begins. So when you're asking the questions, you'll know what your students are able to do. So you're assessing them without actually assessing them. The book is the foundation, but the students' experiences are the framework. Encourage the students to incorporate their experiences into their writing and connect their experiences to the textbook. And the students' answers can serve as a template for their future writing. So have them writing down their ideas. And if they can't write them down on their own, write them on the board for everybody to see. And eliciting will prime them for the actual writing and reinforce any drilling in the class. So elicitation is really, really good for that. You're, again, connecting, you're bridging old information with new information. And that makes it helps them retain that information as well. But also remember, don't over elicit in class. it is a time-consuming activity to do. So the way that you can limit the wasted time is by planning out what you want to elicit before. And also be flexible, because students may not understand what you're eliciting. That's why, again, have a sheet like this with different types of questions, different levels of questions. So you're not forcing your students to guess an answer if if it's clear that they don't understand what is being elicited. And elicit to teach, but also to check for comprehension as well. And as always, model answers, work with the students, write with the students. It'll help your writing as well. So this is where I will come to an end. I want to thank everybody for attending my very first webinar and making it a painless experience. You guys didn't throw me too many curveballs, so thank you very, very much. Please complete the survey after this presentation ends, so we can send you your certificates. And if you have any questions, you can always email us. You can email us here, or you can contact one of our partners in the country that you live in. If you don't see your country on this page, you can just email us at inquiry@ELT Korea. If anybody has any final questions, by all means, you can ask, but otherwise, thank you very, very much.